Hello, dear students. Today, I want to share a story that will help you learn English while exploring a new language. Like English is much like starting on a long journey in the beginning, the path might seem unfamiliar, and you may feel unsure of yourself. But just like any journey, it begins with a small step. When I first started learning English, I felt lost. I didn't know where to begin, and every word seemed like a huge challenge, but then I remembered a quote that kept me going. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. This quote reminded me that all I had to do was start. No matter how small that step seemed, at first my vocabulary was very limited. I barely knew any words and I felt too shy to speak. I kept wondering, how can I possibly talk to others when I know so little? But even though I was nervous, I didn't give up. Instead, I made it a habit to repeat the words I learned. I would say them aloud even if I was alone slowly. This made me feel more confident each day. I was adding a new word to my vocabulary, and little by little my English was improving one day. A friend gave me advice that changed how I looked at learning. She told me learning a new language is like learning to play a musical instrument. You need to practice every day. This simple comparison stuck with me. I thought of English like playing the guitar or piano, something that requires daily practice to get better from that day on. I made an effort to practice English every morning. I started listening to English stories, repeating sentences out loud to me. The rhythm of English was like a song, and soon it started flowing in my mind. Of course, I made mistakes, everyone does, but I quickly learned that mistakes are just small bumps on the road. They may slow you down for a moment, but they won't stop you if you keep going. I remembered a story my teacher once told me about a boy who was learning to ride a bike. He fell down many times, but each time he got back up in the end, he learned to ride that bike confidently. This story became a metaphor for my English learning journey. I may stumble, but I'll keep going, and eventually I'll master it. I found watching English movies with subtitles to be incredibly helpful. It was like having a teacher at home with me. I would watch a movie, and when a word or sentence caught my attention, I would pause it and repeat the line. It felt like I was having a conversation with the characters on the screen. This simple trick really boosted my learning. One of my fondest memories comes from a day I spent at the park. I was sitting on a bench reading a simple English book. A young boy approached me and asked, "What are you reading?" I smiled and showed him the book. He sat next to me, and we started reading together word by word. That day I realized that learning can be a shared experience, and sharing knowledge makes it easier and more enjoyable. I felt a sense of connection, and the interaction encouraged me to continue learning on another occasion. I visited a small cafe in a town where English was the main language spoken. The menu was in English, and some of the words were unfamiliar to me. I felt nervous, but instead of avoiding the challenge, I asked the waiter to explain what the dishes meant. To my surprise, the waiter was kind and happy to help. It was a small victory for me, but it made a big difference. This experience taught me that it's okay to ask for help. Most people are willing to assist. If you show them you're trying to learn. A quote that always stayed with me was, "Little by little and travels far." Learning English is just like that. You don't need to rush. Take it one step at a time, and before you know it, you'll have traveled a great distance in your learning. Every day, I would learn a new word, and every week I would challenge myself to use a new sentence. Slowly but surely, my ability to speak English improved. I even kept a small notebook where I wrote down the new words I learned each night before bed. I would read through those words and it became a bedtime ritual for me. This habit helped me remember the words better and use them in conversation in the beginning. I was afraid to speak in English. I thought people would laugh at my mistakes or my accent. But as I continued to practice, I realized that most people are kind and understanding. They know how difficult it is to learn a new language. One day, I met an elderly man in the park who was reading a book. I sat beside him and started speaking in English. My words weren't perfect, but he smiled and listened patiently. He told me it's not about being perfect, it's about trying. His words stayed with me and gave me the confidence to keep speaking. Even when I made mistakes, I remember another time when I traveled to a city where English was the main language spoken. At first, I was nervous because I wasn't used to speaking English all the time, but after a while, I started to feel more comfortable. I asked people for directions, ordered food in restaurants, and even made new friends. This trip showed me that the best way to learn a language is to use it as much as possible. Don't be afraid to speak, even if you're not perfect. Practice is key. A friend once compared learning English to planting a tree. He said it takes time for the tree to grow, but eventually it bears fruit. I love this quote because it reminded me to be patient with myself. Sometimes it feels like you're not making any progress, but if you keep going, you'll see the results over time. There were days when I felt stuck, like I wasn't learning anything new, but then I would remember another quote every day, may not be good, but there is something good in every day. I started focusing on the small wins, like learning one new word or understanding a sentence better than before. These small victories kept me motivated. Surrounding myself with English was another helpful strategy. I changed the language on my phone to English, started listening to English songs, and watched videos online. It was like creating an English-speaking world around me. This made learning feel more natural and fun. I even started talking to myself in English, which might sound funny, but it worked. I would stand in front of a mirror and pretend I was having a conversation. This practice helped me gain confidence and improve my speaking skills. I remember a time when I received a letter in English. At first, I was scared to open it because I didn't think I would understand it. But when I did, I was pleasantly surprised I understood most of it. And this gave me a sense of pride. It was proof that my hard work was paying off. Learning English also taught me the importance of patience. There were moments when I wanted to give up, but I reminded myself that good things take time. My pronunciation wasn't perfect when I started. Some words were really difficult to say, but I didn't give up. I kept repeating them, listening to how native speakers pronounce them, and slowly my pronunciation improved. Writing also became an important part of my learning process. I started by writing small notes, but eventually I wrote longer sentences. Writing helped me organize my thoughts and remember new words better. One of the best tips I received was to think in English. This was challenging at first because my mind would automatically switch back to my native language. But with practice, I started to think in English more often, which made speaking much easier. Setting small goals also helped me a lot. Instead of trying to learn everything at once, I would focus on one thing at a time. For example, one week I would concentrate on learning new words, and the next week I would practice speaking. There was a time when I felt self-conscious about my accent. I thought it was a problem. But a friend told me, your accent is part of who you are. It's your identity that made me feel better. And I realized that having an accent isn't a bad thing. It's a sign that I'm learning a new language. I also discovered that learning with others can be very helpful. I joined a small English group and we would meet once a week to practice. Speaking it was fun, and I learned a lot from my friends. One of my favorite quotes is, success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. This reminded me that it's okay to make mistakes as long as I keep trying. I also discovered that learning English can be enjoyable. I started playing word games like crosswords and word searches, which made learning new vocabulary exciting. As I kept going, I realized that English had become a part of my everyday life. From watching TV shows without subtitles to writing in a journal, it all added up today. I look back and realize how far I've come. The small steps I took each day have brought me a long way on this journey of learning English. Continuing from where I left off, I realized that learning English was no longer just a goal. It had become part of my daily routine. One of the things that helped me stay consistent was setting up a regular study schedule every day. At the same time I would sit down to practice English, whether it was reading, listening, writing, or speaking, I made sure to dedicate time to it. This routine helped me stay focused and kept me from getting overwhelmed by the idea of learning a whole new language. I also started talking to my family and friends in English. At first it felt a bit awkward, especially because most of them weren't fluent in English either. But they were very supportive, and practicing with them made learning more fun. Sometimes we would play games where we had to speak only in English, and this really pushed me to use the language more often. It also helped me realize that learning doesn't have to be serious all the time. It can be playful and enjoyable. One of the most important things I learned on this journey was the value of being kind to myself. There were days when I felt frustrated because I wasn't learning as fast as I wanted to, or because I made mistakes that seemed silly. But over time I realized that learning a new language is a long process, and it's okay to take breaks when needed. Some days I would set smaller goals for myself, like learning just one new word or writing a short sentence. These small achievements gave me a sense of accomplishment and motivated me to keep going. Another turning point in my English learning journey was when I met a study partner person was also learning English, and we decided to practice together. We would correct each other's mistakes and share tips on how to improve. Studying with someone else made a huge difference because it felt like we were on this journey together. It wasn't just about learning from textbooks or apps anymore. It was about real conversations, real connections. We even started going to English speaking events together, like book clubs and language exchange meetings. These experiences not only improved my English, but also helped me build confidence in social situations. Listening to English music also became one of my favorite ways to practice. I would find songs I liked and sing along, trying to match the pronunciation of the singers. It was a fun way to improve my pronunciation without feeling like I was doing homework. Music has a way of sticking in your memory, and I found that the more I sang along, the more comfortable I became with speaking English naturally over time. I started to notice that certain phrases and expressions I had learned from songs would come to mind when I was speaking with others. One of the most memorable moments in my learning process was when I had to write an important email in English. I had never written something so formal before, and I was worried about making mistakes, but instead of getting discouraged, I took my time. I looked up the words I didn't know, asked for help when needed, and finally finished the email. When I sent it, I felt a great sense of accomplishment. It was a reminder that learning English wasn't just about speaking or listening. It was also about being able to communicate in different ways, including writing. I also discovered the importance of staying positive throughout the learning process. There were times when I felt like I wasn't making progress, especially when I compared myself to others who seemed to be learning faster. But I reminded myself that everyone learns at their own pace. Learning English is a personal journey, and it's important to celebrate your own progress, no matter how small it may seem. There were days when I didn't learn a new word, but maybe I understood a sentence better or felt more comfortable speaking. These small victories added up over time. One of the most practical tips I learned was to label things around my house with English words. I put sticky notes on my fridge table door and even my mirror. This way, I was constantly surrounded by English words, and it became easier to remember them. I also started keeping a journal where I would write about my day in English. It didn't have to be perfect, and sometimes I would only write a few sentences. But this simple practice helped me improve my writing skills and organize my thoughts. There was a day when I had to give a small speech in English in front of a group of people. I was incredibly nervous, but I had practiced a lot beforehand. When the day came, I spoke slowly and clearly, and to my surprise, people clapped. When I finished, it was a huge moment for me because it showed me that all my hard work was paying off. Speaking in front of others was something I never thought I could do. But with practice and patience, I did it. Watching English TV shows was another strategy that helped me a lot. At first, I used subtitles to follow along, but as I got better, I started turning them off. This really helped improve my listening skills because I had to focus more on the language being spoken. I also started to notice how native speakers use certain phrases and expressions in everyday conversation, which made my own speaking sound more natural. Keeping a regular journal in English also became a habit for me. Every night I would write about my day, my thoughts, or even something interesting. I learned it was a simple activity, but it made a big difference in improving my writing and helping me express myself better in English. Sometimes I would challenge myself by trying to write longer sentences or using new words that I had learned. I also found it helpful to challenge myself to speak in English for an entire day. This was difficult at first, but it forced me to think in English and use the language more actively. Whether I was ordering food, talking to friends, or just thinking to myself, I made an effort to use English as much as possible. It was a great way to immerse myself in the language and practice in real-life situations over time. I realized that one of the most important things I learned was to be kind to myself. Learning a new language is not easy, and there will be days when you feel like I was making progress. I reminded myself that every small step counts. Meeting other people who were also learning English was incredibly motivating. We became study partners and would practice together, correcting each other's mistakes and encouraging each other to keep going. It made the learning process more enjoyable and less lonely. Learning with others can be very beneficial because you get to share experiences and learn from each other's mistakes. Another fun way I practiced was by listening to English music and singing along. This helped improve my pronunciation and made learning more enjoyable. It's amazing how much you can learn just by singing along to your favorite songs over time. I noticed that my pronunciation had improved, and I felt more confident speaking English. I also remember a day when I was trying to write an important email in English. I was stuck on one sentence and didn't know how to express what I wanted to say, but instead of getting frustrated, I looked up the words I needed and slowly finished the email. It felt like a big achievement, and it reminded me that persistence is key when learning a new language. In the end, learning English taught me many valuable lessons, not just about language, but also about patience, perseverance, and staying positive. There were times when I felt stuck or frustrated, but I learned to focus on the small victories and keep going. Surrounding myself with English practicing regularly and staying consistent helped me make steady progress. Today, I feel proud of how far I've come, and I know that with continued practice, I will continue to improve. Learning English is a journey, and like any journey, it takes time, effort, and patience. But with the right mindset and consistent practice, it is a journey that can lead to incredible results. Whether it's through watching movies, listening to music, or practicing with friends, there are many ways to make the process enjoyable and rewarding. So if you're learning English, remember to take it one step at a time, stay patient, and enjoy the journey. It's completely normal to ask for help when you're learning something new, especially when it comes to learning English. If you don't understand something, don't hesitate to ask someone to explain it to you. Most people are happy to help, especially when they know you're trying to improve yourself. In fact, one of the best pieces of advice I received when I was learning English was to be patient. Learning a new language takes time, and no one becomes fluent overnight. But if you keep practicing and working on it every day, you will improve. I remember when I first started learning English, I was so eager to become fluent right away. But I quickly realized that it was a gradual process over time. As I practiced more, I began to notice improvements in my ability to communicate. I also discovered that learning English opened many new opportunities for me. Suddenly, I was able to talk to more people, understand more of the world around me, and even improve my job prospects. It felt like the world was becoming bigger and more accessible just because I could understand and speak another language. There was a quote I once read that truly motivated me. The best way to predict your future is to create it. This quote made me realize that if I wanted a future where I was confident in speaking English, I had to work hard to make it happen. With this mindset, I continued studying and practicing every day. I knew that each step I took was bringing me closer to my goals. Another thing that helped me a lot was setting small, achievable goals instead of trying to learn too much at once. I set simple goals like learning 5 new words each week. Each time I met one of these goals, it gave me a sense of accomplishment and motivated me to keep going. I found that practicing English in real-life situations was incredibly helpful. For example, I started using English when ordering food at a restaurant or asking for directions. When I was in a new place, these small, everyday conversations helped me become more comfortable with the language. I'll never forget the time I was at a market and the vendor spoke to me in English. I understood everything she said, and I replied confidently if it was a small interaction. But it was a moment when I realized how much I had improved. Another thing that helped me was watching the news in English. At first, it was challenging because I couldn't understand everything they were saying, but as time went on, I got better and better. Watching the news helped me pick up new words and understand how they were used in context. One tip that I found extremely useful was repeating what I heard. For instance, if I heard a sentence in English, I would repeat it out loud to myself. This practice helped me remember the sentence structure and also improve my pronunciation. I believe it's important to celebrate small victories every time I learned a new word or understood a complex sentence. I would take a moment to feel proud of myself. I once read that learning a language is like building a house first. You lay the foundation with basic words and phrases, then you build the walls with sentences, and finally you add the roof, which is fluency. This analogy made the process clearer for me and helped me stay focused. Making mistakes is also part of the learning process, and it's okay to get things wrong. Sometimes, in fact, every mistake is an opportunity to learn something new. I remember one time when I was talking to a friend in English. And I used the wrong word. My friend kindly corrected me. And from that day on, I never forgot the right word. It was a valuable lesson, and it reminded me that making mistakes is just part of learning. Another strategy that worked for me was thinking in English, instead of translating everything from my native language to English in my head. I tried to think directly in English. At first, it was a bit difficult, but over time it became more natural, and it helped me feel more comfortable with the language. Immersing myself in English was another thing that made a huge difference. I started listening to English music, reading English books, and even changing the language on my phone to English. This constant exposure to the language helped me learn faster. One of my favorite memories, Maurice, is from a time when someone asked me for help with English, and I was able to explain something to them. It felt amazing to share what I had learned.